Hello, you guys, and welcome back to the Ambitious Podcast. I am so excited for today's topic because this is something that I just in the last year or so have really started to integrate within my business. And I've just learned so much, especially from this incredible human being. She is someone I've worked with very closely in strategy as it pertains to today's topic, which is all things events. I see this more and more happening, especially post-COVID. I feel that there was this desire to bring people together again. And we're seeing a rise in person events, whether that is a small dinner that you're going to be hosting as kind of a networking event, whether it is a retreat at a different destination, or whether you're thinking about potentially facilitating or running large events anywhere between, let's say, 75 to 300 people. Whether you're thinking on a big or small scale, Anna today is going to be sharing incredible insights of everything you need to know as it pertains to having successful events. And I really just honestly felt there was no one better to speak to this topic than her. She has truly lived and breathed it. And just wait until you get into this bio because the types of events that she has facilitated, it's truly incredible. So Anna is obviously an event strategist and event planner extraordinaire, and she also puts extra special attention to sponsorship strategy and really helping people to also leverage sponsorships for their events. So she is the founder and CEO of the Elevated Collective, which is a company dedicated to empowering female CEOs to create true impact by educating on how to curate elevated events and secure aligned sponsorships. Now, again, as I said, I don't bring guests on here who are just all theory and all just concepts and ideologies. Anna has lived and breathed this industry. She's been in it for over 14 years running and facilitating events. And so there's no one better to speak to this topic than Anna. Anna knows what it takes to strategize, to build, to also monetize and effectively execute a really well-run event. And honestly, she's been doing it for a long time with experience in things such as experiential division at the Octagon, which is actually a top global sports and entertainment marketing agency in the world. And she also has been known for top-tier hospitality programs on a global scale for Fortune 500 clients, and has also helped with events such as, the Grammy Awards. Okay. So if there's anyone that is going to be the person to tell you the one-on-one of what you need to know about events, it's going to be her. She has been responsible for managing 6+ figure budgets and really curating priceless experiences for clients and people all over the globe. So with that being said, I'm so excited to dive into everything that you need to know if you are either starting an event and wanting to leverage them even further in your business, or if you're just dipping your toe in the water and you want to know what you need to be aware of before you get into that. All of that being said, let's get into that in today's episode. Anna, welcome to Ambitious. I'm so excited to have you here. I was just saying in your intro, all of the experience that not only you have, but also you've given to me in our strategy together. So I'm just like, I feel like I probably have a list of about 75 questions that I want to ask you. And I know we only have an hour together today, so I'm going to try to be as efficient as I can to get all of the knowledge you've given me out to everybody else. But just honestly, so excited to have you here.
Kate, thank you. It's such an honor. And we've been in each other's worlds for a few years now. And anything that you touch, I'm like, yep, I'm a part of it, or I'm in it, or whatever I can be in the world.
Well, I was saying that, I think for me, and I will be honest with you guys, I was very naive to events. I was very sunshine and rainbows. I had no real context, I don't think, until I had a session with Anna. We did a VIP day together, which I highly recommend if you're thinking about doing an event. It's an absolute must experience because in that day intensive, I learned so much about what to be aware of, where people make mistakes. And I feel I had pages and pages of notes of oh my gosh, I need to I need to think about these things and going into our next big event. So I was I see events happening more and more in the space. And I'm curious, obviously this is what you live and breathe every day. Yeah. What events are you seeing? For me, I'm very much in I'm curious the big conference space, but I'm curious with you living and breathing events every week, what are the things that you're seeing really or what do you predict maybe as a trend even for 2024?
Yeah, no, this is really good. And actually a very common question that I'm getting to, because a lot of my clients are well, what type of event should I be leaning into going into 24 and even beyond, right? And so the most common that I'm seeing in this world is retreats. And the reason I say that, that and the fact that they're just so intimate and you can get really deep with all the different verticals that you can cover, right? Whether it's content, whether it's spiritual, whether it's personal growth or business growth, right? So with having a retreat experience, you get one-on-one, but you also get a community at the same time. And so to be able to bring those two aspects together in one place, in one space, is very unique. And the transformations I see are drastic in a retreat setting versus a conference setting, right? Obviously, I'm not saying that in conferences you don't have transformations.
Yeah.
And we've all been to a conference at one point of our life and career. a conference is one to many, right? And
Yeah.
so there is a lot of times where it's tough to connect, not only with the people around you and the other attendees, but with the host or with the speakers, right? There's always this, I was actually at a smaller conference kind of workshop style event a couple weeks ago. And there was this part where I wanted to have one-on-one with the host. I wanted a one-on-one with some of the speakers just to dive a little bit deeper on what they were covering, or even just introduce myself, right?
Yeah.
And it's a little bit limiting because there's 100 other women in the room that are trying to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Whereas with retreats, I mean, you're in it together for the 3, 4, 5 days, however long the retreat is. And you really don't get that kind of connection and work and relationship building than outside of a retreat experience. So,
well, I think like I was also curious in your experience, like obviously events were very much like, I remember going to events pre-COVID, conferences, retreats, weekends. Like I remember doing all of that pre-COVID. Do you feel like it has maintained itself now that we're post-COVID? Or do you think it's almost, in my opinion, I feel like from my, I guess, like market assessment, it feels like it's almost like increased, if not like double the intensity of events. And I feel like the curiosity or the seeking out of most markets looking for those events, whether you're like a realtor or you're someone who's like an online coach, you're a service provider, like anything from YouTube editors looking to get together in person to realtors, right? Like I feel like I've seen it double. Do you think that that's pretty accurate?
100%. Yeah. I mean, and I know this is so cliche to say, but we just crave in person, right? And it just very much amplified after being so siloed with COVID. And I think there's this conversation that a lot of new online businesses have been created since COVID. And just the idea that you can bring your community together and bring them from virtual to in person, that has opened up so much, like so many people's eyes of, wow, really, like I can actually have one-on-one and hug everyone and teach the same content, but just on a different platform. And so the idea of being in person, I think, has completely amplified. And again, in all different verticals of business, to your point. And I think because there's also different types of events, right? So there's the business learning, there's spiritual, there's galas, honestly, so many different styles that you can create. And so now that people are realizing, oh, like we can do our award show, or, oh, we can just bring our team together and teach them, train them, and give them a little bit of fun for an incentive trip, right? Like all those possibilities are through the roof now. And so everyone's just, oh, okay, yeah, let's do it. But to your point, you don't know what you don't know when it comes to events. So
right. Like, and I think like kind of to your point of like the themes, like I know guys, when me and Anna were in person together, we were having kind of like a candid conversation about our experience with events and also like polling other people who were in the room. And what I felt, or I have felt for a while now, for a couple of years, is like, I feel like you go into an event and you look to learn. So to your point, it's like a very educating kind of just, tons of knowledge being spewed at you, and you're missing the connection piece. And you feel like you're like, okay, this is kind of like a textbook taught live, but that's fine. So you have that. And then you also have the ones that are maybe all spiritual and all transformation, but you feel like you got no tangible things from it. And so I feel like there is this gap where people could really benefit from that hybrid approach. And in your opinion, like, do you think people are, to your point, like super siloed in one specific type of event? Or do you think it benefits to have it kind of as a hybrid? Like, do you think it's important, I guess, from a marketing purpose? Because for me, I think when I've personally gone to events, I have gone in with, I guess, expectations. Like the marketing to me is the expectation of the experience. So I think the downside being you go in and you think that you're going to be learning, but then it's kind of like, I got no tangibles, or you feel like you're looking for tangibles, but then it was all just transformation. So do you think it's important maybe to be segmented, or do you think that there is this need now for more of that hybrid?
Yeah, this is, and I know we dove into this when we were talking about your events and your ideas, and it's so valid, because think of it this way: if you are only focusing on one part of your business, then you're letting go of other areas, right? And so this is very similar to events, where you as a business owner, as a host or a facilitator, there are different angles and ways that you can teach and share your zone of genius. So to that point, right, if you only do retreats, you can only service those that can afford retreats, that can take time to do retreats, or prefer that kind of intimate setting. Where if you do retreats and conferences, or retreats and workshops, you're allowing the door to open to so many more people in your community to get access to you, to your knowledge, to your community of speakers and facilitators. So yeah, definitely do not silo yourself in one area, because there's so much opportunity for growth for you and your community by expanding to different styles of events.
Right, right. And I know one of the conversation topics that I found very clarifying, even for myself, just kind of processing through together when we met, was the differentiator between like an event to sell and an event to serve. Because
Yep.
I think, like myself, I've gone to a lot of events where I was like, oh, this is definitely just to serve me and like give me knowledge and to network and things like that. But then you get there and you feel like speaker after speaker is like pitch after pitch after pitch. And you're like, okay, like I get it. Like I paid X amount for this ticket. And now every speaker that's come up is pitching me something else.
Yeah.
And I also myself have been to really fantastic events that had no selling at them. Like from start to finish, it was specifically for clients or past clients. The experience was very much relationship building and was really focused on just like fostering further community more than it was conversion. And so I'm curious, in your opinion, do you think that there's one businesses should be, or the listeners right now are like, I'm thinking about doing an event, or maybe I'm thinking about adding more events to, my project kind of thing for the next year? Do you think we need more selling events or we need more serving events, or maybe you need both? It's just a matter of how they fit your business.
Spot on. I think it's very specific to you and the way that you conduct your business and what you provide as a business owner, right?
Right.
And so the way that I always bring my clients through is like the first step we really step into is like the intention piece is what is your intention in hosting this event or events when we're talking about a long-term strategy. And so really understanding what is that ROI that you want for this event to result in. So if you are focused, let's say your first event of the year is sales focused, that you want to have new clients coming in through your event, great. So we'll structure the event with selling components. Are there upgrades that they can tap into before, during, and after the event? But if you are focusing on nurturing your community or fostering those relationships for retention, but not necessarily at the event, right? That's a whole different strategy of how you're going to approach that event for the way that you're providing your content, right? And so I do think, just kind of like high level, talking to all businesses, you should have a balance of both, just because at the end of the day, you are serving a community. And I don't know about you, but there's not one community that I'm a part of or that I would want to be a part of that is only sell, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's the point of being together in person and being a part of a community is relationship, is conversation, is like really creating that connection piece. So you want to be able to offer that because deep down, we all want that and crave it. And at the end of the day, anyway,
Yeah.
you got to make sure that you're providing that within just your business as a brand, I would say too.
Well, I think too, like part of what I've learned and in our conversations and kind of has like snowballed into my own strategy is, do you want to make the money? And I think this is an important question for people to ask themselves. Do you want to make the money off the event itself? Or do you want to make the money off of like basically the domino of what that event is going to do? Right. Because which we're going to be getting into today, budget and all the numbers and all the non-sexy stuff, but the important stuff nonetheless. And so I think that a lot of the time, like when I've talked to people who have the ideas of events, right, they'll say like, oh, I want to charge, X amount per ticket and I want to make like X amount of profit off of this event. And I'm like, that's beautiful. But also the question becomes like, is this really like the cash cow, if you will, that you're trying to go for? Like, is this actually how you want to generate the money from this? Like, is it from the exposure in the community, selling people in your inner communities of like your offers, your programs, your services, right? In my opinion, I think too many people maybe don't look at the long game of what an event can do for them. And instead it's like, let's get that upfront cash at the event and kind of like call it a day. I had a conversation actually with another multi-seven-figure business owner, and they host events and they were like, we are lucky if we make a good profit on the event. Like if we break even, we're like, this was a success. This is good. And I was like, really? And they're like, yeah, because the reality is the intention of the event is not to make money at the event. The intention of the event is to facilitate opportunities for long-term monthly recurring revenue. So instead of saying we're going to sell a ticket for $2,000 so we can make $1,000 off of each ticket, why not make it an approachable ticket to get more people in the room, to get more exposure, more authority, and then sell them on long-term, let's say 6 months of services or 6 months of whatever into some ongoing monthly recurring revenue. But I'm curious, the clients that you obviously facilitate and plan for, is that usually part of the strategy, or do you feel like it's kind of a half-half? Like some people are like all the event, or it's like kind of all or nothing?
Well, I laugh because over the last, I would say 6 months, maybe up to a year, I've actually transitioned a little bit more into event strategy because I would see clients coming to me with just one event in mind and wanting that profit to come out from that one event only. And in reality, events, like they're not cheap, right? No matter what type of, no matter
no, my friends, they are not to the numbers, because that was probably my biggest lesson in events with Anna.
Yeah.
But yes, sorry, continue.
No, and to that point, right? Again, I keep saying you don't know what you don't know. And so with the idea of coming to, hey, I want to hire you. I want to have this one event. Can you help me put it together? Absolutely. Like we can put it together. But I started realizing that this like long-term strategy piece in business did not exist in a lot of my clients or prospects that I was having conversations with, right?
Yeah.
And so I love that you bring this up, because it is so important to know, and I say this with a lot of my first clients, is listen, if we're doing long-term, if we're doing multiple events, you have to be okay with the fact that potentially your first event is going to be in the red, or we're going to be just breaking even. But that is totally fine, knowing that we're playing the long game and that money will be recouped in event 2, 3, 4, 5, however that looks like, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, 100%. This is, I mean, it's a constant conversation, and it's just understanding, again, what is your intention about adding events to your business? Do you really just want to just have one event just because it's like the new thing, or your coach is doing it and you want to bring your community together? Or is this really a pillar in your business that you want to add in it to be a really revenue generating piece of your business? But then you have to also understand just the strategy of, okay, what are the events to start with? And then how do you incorporate other assets from your business that makes sense to then continue making the revenue long-term outside of just ticket sales?
Right, right. Well, I guess the follow-up that I have to that is like, do you think it actually is specifically strategic in your opinion to only start events at certain stages of your business? Like, I feel like I've had conversations with people who are, you know, first year in business. And I've also had conversations with people who've been in business for 5 years, and both are like, I'm considering doing events. Like, do you have any like wise advice as to like, hey, this is not a good idea unless you have, like, in my personal opinion, since our work together and what I've learned, you guys, is like, if it was me and I could pass any advice to you, I would say to start with a small event and get your feet wet. You know, small, potentially probably being like 10 people, potentially at a retreat or even less, and maybe going up to 20 people. Say you wanted to get a dinner or a small intimate something. Yeah. But I think you have to go through something. Like, I think if someone's jumping right to a conference, it would be the scariest thing that I would be able to witness for them, because I think you have to go through the ropes of it, the planning of it, the budget of it, to realize the impact of what all those decisions look like, so that you're not doing that at 10x scale and therefore also having 10x risk. But do you think that's specific to a certain stage of business? And do you think someone should start with a small event?
Absolutely. And I'll say this, every business is different, right? And every community is different. I agree with what you just recommended. And I'll even add to, depending on also how big your community is, because I see businesses that have the money that they can invest, right? They've been in business for quite some time, but maybe their community is not big enough, or don't actually understand what events can do for them in their business or in their life. And so they announce their business, or they announce their event or retreat, and it's crickets, because it's not something that their community is used to or knows or thinks that would be valuable for them, right? You can have lots of money, you can have massive community, but not sell. And I've seen businesses that have just started and have either raving communities, or just have the money to invest from the beginning. So it honestly, and again, it just like, know your community, know who your clients and your group is that you're serving, because there's also times where you might want the event, but maybe your community doesn't. So that's really important to know from like a market research standpoint. It goes to what does your community want? Also, what do they need? And maybe they don't know that they need. And then, is events or in person something that they actually are interested in? Or are they, here's an example. If you're serving newborn moms, right? Or moms in the beginning stages, where newborn to toddler, or however that looks, most likely they're not going to be able to take off some time to go to an event, right? So it really is, it goes back to your intention, your market research, understanding who you're serving, how you're going to deliver, because not every business is meant to host in-person events. And I think that's also really important to hear.
Well, I think, it goes back to that principle, right? Of like what you want for your business, but also like, what does your consumer, what does your market want? Like, you might want to market an event, but does your market want that event? Exactly. And I think also recognizing in the planning of it, you know, accessibility is definitely a conversation when it comes to the price point of tickets and things, which I know we're going to get into. But I also think accessibility of when you're hosting it, you have to keep that end person in mind. Because I think I see too often people say, yeah, like we're going to go to Tahiti. And I'm like, okay, like I love that for you. But also, have you thought about the fact of what that ticket price is going to be, of like the season of what you're in, like the season of when you're planning it, right? Is it winter? Is it spring? Is it summer? What people have going on in their life? Like that's an important part of even deciding to have it, like timing of the event as well, right? So
Absolutely.
I'm curious because obviously, elevated collective, you are someone who is genius at elevating events. I'm curious, in your opinion, what do you think really elevates an event? Like if you're thinking of in your mind, and you've done lots of events, big and small, and you're like, this is a basic event versus a very elevated event. In your opinion, what is the difference maker in an event to really make it that elevated experience?
Honestly, and I'll talk from being a planner and strategist, but also an attendee, because naturally when I go to events, I look for certain things too.
Yeah.
And it's the connection piece. It's the personalization. And again, big or small, right? So you can be in an intimate setting in a retreat and still feel pretty siloed and not like seen. Going to a big conference with thousands of people and feel really seen because there's personalization, there's customization to you. And you're like, wait a second, how do they know that I love popcorn or that, that this is the time that I need, right? So there's the intentionality of, and again, it goes back to, do you know your market and your audience?
Yep.
Because if you don't, then you don't know how to create those really special moments that are going to make every single person in that room feel like it was meant for them only and not the whole entire group, right? So yeah, I would say that for me, that always makes that they thought about everything, because they thought of even like room drops, as simple as room drops, right? I understand room drops can get a little bit pricey depending on the size of your event, but what I am so intentional with a lot of my retreat clients is we always, in our like intake forms and getting to know the attendees, it's ask these quirky, fun questions of what's your favorite tea? What's your favorite snack? What's your season, right? So we really gather all this information so that way then when they arrive, we have a beautiful gift on their bed waiting for them. Yeah. And it's just this really amazing experience when you like walk through the door, you have this amazing room to yourself, or if you're sharing, and there's like intentional gifts waiting for you that are completely thought out. And there's just that like special feeling of, man, the experience hasn't even started and I feel already loved, right? So that's
I think it's like back to that mindset too of like scale the unscalable. I think people try to streamline, do that, and it's not maybe potentially even as efficient as you might hope it to be. But the experience for the consumer, like one of the things we just did at one of our events, guys, was just like personal handwritten cards. Now, yes, could I have had those mass produced and just like, hey, name, and have the same thing on each one? And I'm like, yes, but the reality is like women have flown to this event. They put their time aside. They've invested their money to be here. And especially when it is, 25 people, you have the ability to personalize that. Like, yes, it's going to take a little bit of extra TLC, but the reality is like that experience makes that person feel seen for being there versus just like, again, like another number in the crowd. And so obviously, since having Anna help us with our first event and now going into our another event, oh my God, the things that I have learned and all the categories that that are now on my list. Admittedly, guys, I'm the first to be transparent about my own shortcomings. And when I had the first session with Anna, I very much was like, I had been to a lot of events. I had been attending a lot of events and had seen what I liked, what I didn't. I was just so naive to, number one, what it took from a planning process. Number two, the budget, that the things that I liked, what that costed to recreate for myself. And so that's why I wanted to actually have her on today, was just to share all the aha moments that I had with you, to make sure that you're thinking of all the factors that you need to be thinking of when you're hosting or considering planning an event. And I want to start, which I feel like you would probably agree with budget and with cost, because I think kind of as we're talking about with the profit on events and what can be generated from them, I think there's a big elephant in the room of what an event actually costs. I'm absolutely like open to getting into all of the numbers, but just to be transparent with you guys, like when we did our New York dinner, not even including necessarily even like photography, videography, all of that, I want to say like 20, 25 people cost us at just over, I would say about 10, 12 grand all in. Yeah. And so the ROI of that, we didn't have crazy profit on it. If anything, I probably would say, I'd have to double check the numbers again, but I think we were probably actually in the red, which to Anna's point, I'm very much okay with, because there was so much that I learned. It's kind of like when you make investments into things, sometimes you kill it and sometimes you don't. And so for me, I'm actually not bitter about it, because it taught me everything that I needed to know for the next event we're going to go into, and also to pass on to other people doing events. But I'm curious, like, okay, small event, big event, like what do we need to, I'm not even going to go specific with you. I'm just going to say, give me all you got, because I feel like event and budget wise, there's so much. So in your opinion, someone's going into an event, what do we need to be mindful of when it comes to budget and when it comes to costing out? Like, okay, I want to run an event. What's it going to cost me? What are we even looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to preface by saying, outside of your intention building, this is the most important piece before you even start looking for the flowers and the backdrops and all the things that we enjoy doing. Because if you don't know what numbers you're supposed to be working with to be able to make a profit, or at least understand your numbers, then that end result at the end of the day, you're going to be terrified to see that income versus expense line item, right? So I always say, understanding the type of event that you want to build, right? And it honestly comes back to, okay, are we doing a retreat style? Or are we doing a conference? Are we doing a workshop? Or are we doing a curated dinner? What we did for New York, right? Once you really feel aligned with that, then you really want to understand, it almost sounds like you're going backwards, but it's like, what is the experience that you want to create? Because if you understand, okay, I want to do a dinner, but I want to have 3 speakers at the dinner, right? And I want to have goodie bags, and I want a photographer, and I want florals. You envisioning your experience is going to pretty much start laying out what line items in your budget are that you're going to need to then create those estimates. And so I always walk through, let's envision it. Let's almost build a high level itinerary and then utilize that into creating the budget. And then start reaching out to potential vendors. And this is, again, if you're not working with someone that knows those estimates, right? Like with you and I, we did our VIP day. I was like, okay, these are going to be the high level estimates just because I know the industry of those line items. But let's say you need a venue, you need your photographer, you need your food and beverage, your florals and decor, right? Start reaching out to different vendors in those areas, or even if you potential vendors that you want to actually use, and just get those estimates and understand what are even you working with before you start this planning process, because then you actually have those expectations. And then, because again, if you're not in it, you have no clue that there's some venues that can charge you 20 grand just for your venue versus, or even in this case, right, with your dinner, they can charge easily 5 grand for you to just have a private room at a restaurant. Yeah. You just wouldn't realize it for a dinner, right? Just because we make dinner reservations left and right all the time. Right. So it's really kind of understanding and getting those estimates and just creating that high level budget for yourself to see what is that expense total cost that you should be expecting. And then as you start kind of planning into it and having conversations with your team or with your planner and understanding, okay, do we need this? Do we not need this? Right? Yeah. Like, is this fluff or is this necessary? And then start working with those numbers to feel where it aligns with you. This is such a conversation that is so important with events. Going into also just what's that profit number that you want to work towards for that event, right? Again, we're talking the first one, it might be tough, but understanding, like, let's say 20 grand for your event, you want to make 10 grand profit. You know that you need to price out your tickets to come in totaling at least 30 grand if you want to make that desired profit, right? Right. So there's a lot of this systemizing and functions for you to really understand that can also lead you into pricing out your tickets properly, which I also see.
Because actually, and again, like, guys, I'm an open book. For the first New York event we did, I very much went with the mindset of like, I just knew I wanted to get people together. I knew that I wanted to be very accessible. It was like $197, $297 kind of thing. Yeah. And I was like, I want to be accessible, and this is what I'm charging. And so I went actually completely reversed what Anna's advice is. And I actually sold the tickets first and then planned afterwards. And, you know, we all talk about messy action, and the messy action just ended up being a little messy. But for me, I learned so much from that. And I think with the ticket price side of things for our, you know, in the event planning process we're in right now with Anna for something coming out shortly, for us, we've learned so much of really like working backwards. Like, you're thinking of like the event is, and that really indirectly is going to create your ticket price. And so for me, even with the next event that we're doing, I was very clear on how much I wanted the ticket to be for people to go, because I wanted to be accessible if they had to fly or whatever it might be. Right. And so that point, it came down to the conversation of like, where can you cut cost? What is necessary versus not necessary? And one of the things that I remember you mentioning, and I would love to hear you speak on as to just your thoughts or advice around it, is food and beverage. Because when I had my day with Anna, one of the things that, and why I highly recommend if you're going into an event, especially if it's your first event, that you should work with someone in coordinating it and getting the strategy around it, is, to Anna's point, like the understanding of what market value is. Like, for me, as I know what price points are considered normal in certain industries, the same thing applies when it comes to events. Like, I don't know what's considered high food cost, low food cost. I don't know what's considered high for a room rental versus low for a room rental, right? Like, there's so many intricacies that if you're not in the industry, you're not privy to. And so I would love to, just Anna, any thoughts when it comes to, food and beverage? Because I know from our conversations, that really was like a big eating up of the budget, of most people's budgets.
Yeah, I mean, the two biggest line items usually in events are the venue and food and beverage, just across the board. And I do remember this conversation, and this kind of also coincided with the venue costs and rental fees. When we were talking about the different venues and vendors market and sell their space or their service depending on the type of event that you are hosting. And so I don't know if you remember this, Kate, but we were talking about a venue, and if you reached out to them saying that you're doing a wedding versus just an entrepreneurial event, your wedding cost is going to be sometimes triple, because they just know that they can upcharge.
They know their market. They know their market. Yeah.
Versus just standalone conference. So to that point of understanding just like the industry and just how vendors work. And listen, we all do it, right? Like we all upcharge in certain areas, or we know our markets of how and where we can charge. And so that memory is like always in my head from our conversation, because that was actually an aha moment for me as a planner and as a strategist, realizing that, to me, that's common knowledge, right? Like that, right. I don't even think twice about that. But for those that are not in this space, that don't reserve or contract venues and vendors often, you have no clue if you're signing up for something that's reasonable, or if they are just like charging you an arm and a leg for it, right?
Yeah.
To quickly go back into just the F&B conversation, food is so important for an event. And I say this because I'm sure we've all been to an experience where we're sitting there, where like our stomach is growling. We can't even think. We're not paying attention to what's being spoken to. And all we can think about is like that next meal, or I didn't bring a snack, or I need water, whatever it is. And at the end of the day, the experience that you're creating for your guests is actually, it's being diminished, because you're not offering them for that kind of replenishment. And really, going to an event, there's a lot of energy that you need to exert to be around people, to take all the knowledge, to work on yourself, right? Mm-hmm. So there's so much that you're spending out of yourself that you as a host need to be very intentional on making sure that there is always space to refuel and to refill on all different capacities, but in this case, food and beverage. So being able to, even if it's not, you're providing it necessarily in the sit down way, but are you creating a break where there is enough time for someone to be able to leave your venue, go somewhere with a group of people that they just met, and not feel rushed that they like, oh, I only have 30 minutes to like go find somewhere, scarf it down and get back. And so I say that because I've had experiences like that. And at the end of the day, it's like the rest of my afternoon is actually ruined, in all honesty, because I feel rushed. Like I didn't feel like I got the experience that I needed. I'm like not focused on what's happening then on the stage or in the experience. So creating that flow and understanding and kind of just like that really good experience when it comes to not only the teaching and the learning, but also just the nourishing part of the event.
Right. And I think also the relationship of the venue to the food and beverage, because that was something that was a big aha, to be honest with you guys, for me, was in planning our event. I had fell in love with this venue that was not connected to like a hotel. It was kind of like a self-sustaining, just like conference space, basically. Yeah. And while I was really in love with that space, it wasn't really connected logistically to the things that we needed when it came to food or even rooms, if you were going to have people who were staying there. And so I think something that was a big takeaway for me was actually looking into whether you do need accommodations paired with your conference space, because usually when you do invest into both those two things with the same business, there is kind of like a complement to doing that. There is advantages to having that all in one wheelhouse, basically, when you're making that investment. And so that was also something for me that I thought, okay, well, it's just, two separate places. I'm just splitting the cost in half. Well, no, if you're going to have the conference space in a hotel where you're also renting the rooms and having a room block for your guests to stay at, and you're doing the food all through there, like you're getting incentives because you're keeping it all in-house for them versus, chopping it up and having one be the conference space, another hotel is another space, and having it catered by somebody else, right? Like they're all separate kind of a la carte costs. So that also for myself, kind of in connection to food and beverage, paired with the actual venue, was a huge insight for me of like, okay, we got to do our homework here, because the budget side, especially when it is potentially your first event, or, if you're just kind of dipping your toe into the water and getting into it, you don't necessarily in all businesses have a lot of money to quote unquote waste, right? Like you don't have a lot of like a secret $150,000 venue budget that you've decided, like the actual space where you're going to host the event. Because one of the things, which it wasn't for the same reason that we were talking about it, but she had noted to me the impact of light within a space, right? And so for me, loving content, I was like, absolutely, we need that natural light. But we had to have conversations about, I said, I really want there to be natural light so that everyone can take marketing and that it's very marketing centered or marketing focused objective. And Anna had given some really good insight as to what you need to be conscious of, whether you're picking like a basement conference space versus one with light. So I'm curious what advice you'd give as it pertains to kind of picking your venue.
Yeah, I mean, I think as humans, if we go somewhere dark, we want to our natural instinct is to cuddle in, right? Like crouch down, and it's more like, all right, it's time for bed.
Snuggle up. Yeah.
Yeah. Versus when there's light, you're open, there's so much more room, right? For yourself and in the space. And so, and I'm not saying dark rooms are not needed, because again, understanding what type of experience you're providing. So if we're doing a sound healing session, absolutely, if you have a room that's in a basement that's like, you can't hear anything, there's no light, that's fantastic. But if you're bringing in people to deep dive and to learn and to listen to speakers and be super intentional in the space, you want to have as much light as possible, because it's just going to be a lot more welcoming for the attendees to actually take in all of the information. It's also this mood conversation, right? So if you're in a dark space, you're going to kind of come into yourself, right? And work more internally, versus when it's lighter and it's so airy, you're a lot more open to having conversations and being introduced yourself and into a little bit more, just more airy, right? And so again, intentionality, understanding what is the event, what is the session, because you can have different rooms for different sessions if that's the venue that allows that. Just really understand that absolutely light helps create the experience for you and allows for the experience for the attendee to also be a positive one.
Well, I think back to your word of intention, I think another insight that I think is worth considering too is the actual, the actual physical venue you're choosing, but the setup of said venue is also a big thing, but kind of just the marketing did really well, which was great. But I had this kind of pivotal moment where we had already filled up X amount of tables and we had the opportunity to bring in another table. And Anna kind of provided some insight and said, Kate, you can, but if you put that type of table in the middle of the room, you're going to totally break up the flow of the event. You're going to kind of basically segment the room into two halves. It's going to impact networking. Not even something for me as a lay person to events that I would have ever considered. I didn't think about the flow of networking. I didn't think the flow of the walking space. I didn't consider any of that. I was just like, we've got seats for enough people. We're good to go. Right. So I think for myself, again, having gone to a lot of events, one of the things that I realized that I feel like is a big thing is tables. Yeah. Because if you've ever gone to an event, I've gone to, it's almost like school style where you're all facing the front of the room and you're at long rows of tables. Right. You at those events barely network. You are not connecting with other people because you're all basically side by side, single file basically. And it's you and your laptop and your notebook and you're facing the front and you're just engaged with whatever the speaker is doing. And that's basically it. It's difficult for getting up and down to go to the washroom, for water breaks, food breaks, whatever it is. And it was always the worst experience for me when those single file line type tables. And I had also in our planning of our event said, okay, I might want to do full rounds. So 10 people at a table, at a round table. That's a lot better for networking, things like that. Yeah. And then again came the conversation of, well, where's the screen? Because if you've got a screen at the front of your room, or if you're planning on doing a presentation, then you don't want half of your table facing their backs to the other people at the table. Because then again, you're really just, closing off that networking power. So right. I think there's just so many intricacies like that people don't think about right. when they're going into planning events. And I was curious, when it comes to setup of the room or the experience, is there anything in your opinion that's just like an absolute no-no? Like something that you would be like, if you are planning an event, do not do this.
Yeah. And I think it actually is a segue from the lighting conversation. And we talked about this is having a room, if you have like a lot of windows in your room, which is fantastic for what we just talked about, but making sure that you at least have a wall that is where your stage and your presenters are going to be in front of, right? Because if you put a stage and your speakers or presenters in front of a window that is shining light through, not only can your attendees not see your speakers or anyone that's on stage because it's pretty much shadowed, right? But it's also the sun is blaring into your attendees' eyes. So understanding how you're creating that layout within the venue, even just like the major areas of the event, right? So sunlight, having the stage be at the right space. If let's say you have a really long room, right? And the only way is to kind of stagger your attendees, and we briefly talked about this, is add TVs in between areas that kind of like elongate your room. So that way those in the back, even though they might not have the best viewpoint of the stage, they can still have a large screen that they can kind of look into if there's a presentation or if they, want a little bit of a closer look, right? So same concept. If you go to a concert, right, at a massive arena, you have obviously the stage, but you also have massive jumbotrons for you to look up into.
Yep.
That's the same concept there. So that way you're giving viewpoints for everyone in the room. That way, again, it's a collective. Everyone feels seen and heard versus just like those that just got in front of the room and like VIP seats, if you want to call them.
Right. It's kind of like when you go to a concert, right? Like you don't want to have to be front row to feel like you got the most of the Taylor Swift concert, right? Like whatever it might be. I think you also mentioned, speakers, which is something that I think a lot of people, especially with business events, that they're thinking about and considering. And I was curious, when it comes to speakers, because it is something so many people explore, what is your advice when it comes to speakers at an event? Because I think, in my opinion, speakers are good as a facilitator because you get a break, right? Like obviously to your point, it's a lot of energy. So you get a break to be able to kind of like recharge your battery and kind of get that fueled back up. But I'm also curious, can speakers ever be, in your opinion, like a negative for an event? Can that ever be something that you feel almost negatively impacts an experience?
Yeah. And I'll again preface by saying understanding if the speakers are right for your event, right? Just because you are, an A-list speaker at your event to hopefully sell more tickets, obviously, right? Like a little bit more attention, tap into their community and network. Doesn't mean that it's actually the smart move, because maybe your community actually doesn't resonate with what they would be teaching or with that brand specifically, right? So I think speakers have to also be very intentional. When we were planning or in conversation with one for next year, it's understanding the zone of genius and the gifts that each speaker has and that they can provide, and structuring it into the event that makes sense for the attendees. At the end of the day, like you're doing this for the attendees, not for you.
Yeah.
Sorry, like just that you have to understand that first. And so are there people in your network already, right, that you can ask for a favor if they're aligned with the structure, with the content, with the ROI that you're trying to produce, to have them be that outlet and additional resource for the event and for your audience. If that's a yes, and if you feel like speakers that you want to have on stage with you are complementary to the theme, the intention, right, the people in your audience, then just really it's a fantastic way to give you a break, to open up a different avenue for your audience to hear another perspective, whether it's in your industry or other industry that complements, right? And at the same time, you're also, benefiting the speaker as well to be able to open up their opportunity for welcoming new eyes and clients potentially down the road too, right? So I'm a massive fan of having speakers or facilitators, right, at your events. A lot of friends, again, for you to have a little bit break, for you to actually also enjoy your time at your own event versus like around and only being on stage all day. But at the same time, like make sure that it makes sense, because I have been to events where I am very confused as to why.
Like they just like threw 10 people on stage and you're like, okay, cool. You just mentioned something that I was like, I cannot sweep past, which was having someone at your event who is responsible for the event. Because when you are, especially if you are someone who's a marketer, you're someone who needs to use this event for business leverage in some way, shape, or form for yourself. My biggest insight was the quote unquote fires that happen that you just cannot foresee, right? Like it's just, they happen. It's part of the process. It's part of just, the moving and grooving of all of these different moving pieces, right?
Yeah.
But even for us with our New York event, like it was things not going proper with some of the goodie bags, the flowers not being done, guests are waiting outside, and you're like, oh my God, right? And so I think, our conversations, I know one of the biggest things you had said, and you're like, listen, me or someone else, it doesn't matter. You need somebody who is the point person for problems. So like issues with the food, go to so-and-so. Issues with decor, go to so-and-so. And like, it's not you as the host, because your job is to be the host. Your job is not to deal with all the fires, because otherwise you're being pulled in a million different directions and your guests feel that experience. I cannot tell you how incredibly helpful it was to have other people who were the point person, even at a small event of like 30 people. I was like, okay, she warned me about this and here it is. It literally was it was so case in point for me of the impact of needing someone at your event to be the point person, because you need to be the marketer. You need to be the facilitator, the person of delivery, the person who facilitates the experience. And it's so difficult to do that when you've got the chef saying, hey, quick question, what about this? Or the decor person saying, hey, what are we thinking for this? And you're like, I don't have time for this. I have to go interact with my guests, right? Not to mention if you're also adding potentially another layer of getting media at your event that also requires your face and voice, which again, at our first event was a big eye opener for me. Was like, I needed to go get marketing and content material to leverage, this opportunity. But then my guests were kind of like showing up and I'm getting marketing and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just so many moving pieces. So that would be for sure for me, something that I definitely had learned in our time together. And I think to your point of speakers, my knowledge in our initial time, like we were talking about budgeting together, guys. And I was saying, how much do you think I should budget for speakers? And Anna was like, well, what's your relationship with the speakers? Because it's interesting, since our session, obviously we've gone deeper into planning now. And I have had conversations with people that I literally fully went in being like, I'm going to need to probably, because a lot of my peers love to charge high ticket, bless their heart. And so do I, but they love to charge high tickets. So I went in thinking I'm looking at a good 7-12 grand maybe to have this person on my stage. Yeah. And just the impact of relationships, I was so blown away of like, no worries. Like, you're so supportive of me, cover my flight or whatever. And I'm good to go. And I'm like, okay. So like the budget that I had allocated originally that made the event so costly, the relationships that I had built over the last several years really came in key for me, because it was able to really like stack our speakers, and the cost for ourselves was very minimal. And I think, going into having speakers on stage, do you feel like that's kind of usually the case, or is it usually the situation of like, you do need a decent budget?
I will say this, it honestly depends on the business and your brand and then, circle. I think there's both sides to it. There are absolutely speakers and coaches and facilitators and leaders that absolutely do it out of the kindness of their heart, in addition to, relationship that you have, the support that you have. Because there's also situations where you can be doing stuff in the background for her or for them in that business that no one else sees. And their way of paying back is to serve your community by stepping on that stage, right? So but there's also, I want to like preface by saying this, that there's so many ways that you can quote unquote pay for your speakers that it's not directly in terms of a monetary investment, right? There are ways that you can support each other's communities where you come in and support a mastermind or a training session and they come in for that event, right? Actually understanding that there's some like the travel expenses is usually like a custom for a host to pay. Honestly, it goes both ways. It depends on who you're in relationship with and understanding the business and the style of event, right? I will say almost all of my clients, when they are asking for support, their peers or from their circle, almost, I would say 99% of them say, no worries, just pay for my flight or my room or whatever. And, good, we're squared up. Or like, no problem, but can you do a training session in next month?
Right.
Mastermind class. So yeah, I mean, I think it's really understanding your circle, who you're asking, because naturally, right, like you're really going to go for like the AAA listers. Definitely expect to have a fee because that's part of their business, right? And just at that level, you just have to. But again, even in those circles, right, they sometimes do it for each other, a monetary transaction too.
Right. And I think kind of on the piggyback of the monetary side, one of the things that was, and I know is like your specialty and you lean very heavily into is sponsorships, because
Yeah.
I think admittedly, my belief was that like if you were not someone who was like a mega influencer with 2 million followers, I was like, who is going to sponsor with today's market being so competitive of so many people having so much reach? As a sponsor, how to even like, what does that look like? How to get sponsorships?
Yeah.
And one of the things that really cued this for me, and especially going into our next event, was one of the hidden costs that became very visible to me at our last event was goodie bags. And this was something that we had talked about, myself and Anna, about looking at how you can, again, create that personalized experience, create something that was shareable, marketable, things like that.
Right.
So we do the goodie bags. And I will say, and Anna, you can correct me, maybe it was just poor planning, but I feel like goodie bags or like gifts for your attendees can be so wildly expensive.
Yeah.
And just such a hidden cost that you think like, oh, it's just a small thing that each person gets. But when we were budgeting out per bag, I would say like without sponsorships, this is, guys. So I just want to clarify that this is no sponsorships. Without sponsorships, those bags are going to run you a couple $100s per attendee. And so then when you think about doing that, let's just say you got 100 people at an event. Let's just say you got 30 people at an event and each goodie bag is $250 or $300 worth of valuable stuff.
Yeah.
It adds up very fast when you're talking about that budget and that cost again, right? So I think that going into sponsorships, I know that that can be a very big asset to being able to still have goodie bags, but obviously getting assistance with how you're going to fill those bags. So if someone's then thinking, okay, I don't want to blow my own budget on the goodie bags, but if I'm thinking, okay, I want to use sponsors for the event, where does one even start with that? And do you think that someone has to be at a certain stage of business or I guess exposure to leverage sponsorships? Or are you like, no, like anyone, any stage, you can do it and here's what's going to look like?
Yeah, I love this conversation. And I feel like I have this easily multiple times a week.
I'm sure.
And rightfully so, there is this fear of like, I'll have the amount of followers or I'm not well known. Why would XYZ sponsor me? Or why would they donate a product? And honestly, it always goes back to the intention piece of the event. I always tell my clients, or if I'm helping and supporting in the sponsorship area, we need to lock in exactly what is this event going to do for the audience and for the brand that we are asking as a sponsor. A lot of times when you're building the event, it's rightfully so, it's selfish, right? It's like, I want to have this, or I want it to look like this, and I want this experience to this way. You have to really think of it from the attendee perspective of like, what should it be for them? And again, it goes back to the market research, understanding your market and your community. So you understand that piece, that also translates into the sponsorship world. So a lot of times, once you understand that, then you understand what brands have similar or the same intention or mission that your event is achieving or wanting to achieve. That's the biggest thing. So it's like you have an event that is very focused on community, then you're not going to ask a sponsor to come in and have a sales goal that is in mind, because that doesn't align with the type of event and the audience technically that they're coming into, right? Once you really understand that, it's like, what are certain brands or companies or products that I use on a daily basis, whether it's, skincare, whether it's tire, shoes, or products within your house, right? Think of those that you commonly use and you are a fan of, because then when you create that outreach and have those conversations, it's genuine. You've used their product. Right. You actually care about their product or their mission or their incentive or initiation if they're, have one, right? So that is so important, because I see a lot of times where it's like, all right, yeah, let's pitch to MasterCard and like get 10 grand. You're like, all right.
I like to spend money on my credit card. Let's pitch MasterCard. That sounds like a plan.
Fantastic. Yeah, I have 10 MasterCards. Great. But
right.
Like, let's start in areas of really intentionally understanding, like MasterCard has initiatives that they want to cover throughout the year. Absolutely. I'm not saying you can't reach out to MasterCard, but are you going to be helping them get to those initiatives or those goals, or that like they have a sales goal or whatever it is? So really start making the list of all the products, all the companies and brands that you're using. That's going to be your hot list, because there's an initial conversation, there's an initial relationship. And during your process of sponsorship, engage with that brand, whether it's socially, whether if you're going to be at another event, right? Like they'll have reps or the CEO go to that event and like introduce yourself, have conversations. Because when your name pops up in your outreach, there'll be a common name or they'll recognize it. And they're like, oh yeah, like Kate has been tagging us left and right for the last 3 months. Like, absolutely, we want to give our product to her because she loves it. She uses it. And we know that her community obviously loves it as well. So it makes sense for us to have that brand exposure or the product on the event. So it's just really understanding, those pieces. And then once you, let's say, because I've had a client, we're like, okay, well, I made my list. I've gone through my list. Like, what now? So the next step is understanding. And again, are there other brands that share that same initiative, that mission of your event that maybe you don't use, but you're creating that relationship, you're having conversations. And at the end of the day, as long as you can prove that them being at your event, whether it's at the goodie, like in the goodie bag, whether if they have a table, whether they are sponsoring from a monetary, right? Like they'll write you a check to be a title sponsor or stage sponsor, whatever that is. How will it benefit them? Right? Like, is the audience primed, ready for if they see that logo, they're going to be after the event or even at the event, going to their website or purchasing their product. Yeah. It just really needs to make sense, because if you go to someone that like, why would I be at your event? Then of course you're going to get a pretty solid no, or they won't even respond, right? So I think that's the kind of the
well, I think you also mentioned like a stage sponsor, which I think is probably, in my opinion, when I had conversations with others as well, one of the most like, I guess, uncommon or less known sponsors, which is basically where someone sponsors your event, whether it is like them buying something specific for the event or actually writing you a check for the event. And in turn, you basically give them a spotlight on stage. Right. And I think back to our earlier speaker conversation too, while it can be leverageable to obviously have a sponsor, it's always nice to have someone give you $5-6 grand, whatever it might be for your event. I think to Anna's point, it's also important to make sure that when you do that, the speaker is someone, to her point, that really benefits your community, that benefits your audience member, not just benefits you for your budget. And I think that that's something that I've seen when I've gone to events, to be like, this is a very random person to have on stage. But then full circle, you realize like, oh, they're the sponsor at the back who's on the screen. So this is all coming together now, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
and I will say brands also can see through now, because events are so popular and because everyone wants sponsors, whether again, it's product or monetary. A lot of sponsorship directors, if they see an email coming knowing that there's no alignment whatsoever with the brand and with the event, like they're not even going to finish reading the email and, come in with a beautiful proposal showcasing, even if you provide like this is just a hot tip if you are pitching, when you are doing the outreach, create something that's personal for that brand. So it's not a copy and paste pitch deck that 20 different brands are receiving, like of intentionally, how can that brand have visibility at your event? What is the benefit of them having a booth versus having someone on stage as a speaker in between sessions, and your logo be on multiple assets of your event? How does that result in the benefit for the brand? You will get their attention so fast. They'll be like, yep, can we have a conversation and talk me through this? Because I want to know how this ROI we could make work.
Well, I think it goes back, right, to that classic marketing principle of like, we're in it for ourselves. Whether you're a consumer watching someone's TikTok or whether you're a consumer like a MasterCard who's trying to have someone sell whatever to you, at the end of the day, you're like, what's in it for me, right? How does this benefit me, my company, whatever that may be? So I do think regardless of when you're marketing, it's always an important conversation to a speaker. How does this audience benefit you? To a sponsorship, how is your sponsorship going to affect your business? How can we help you, basically, is the constant motto.
Exactly.
And, with obviously like today, we're talking speakers, we're talking venue, food and beverage, decor, budget, all of these things. And someone's saying, they're like, okay, maybe I'm not going to do an event. But like hopefully, by the way, today has not scared you. It has just educated and empowered you. My goal today was that you felt comfortable and you felt confident to go into planning an event and knowing exactly what you need to do and what you need to keep your eye on. I don't want any of you running an event and then ending up severely in the negative, or saying, I didn't know that. I wish someone had told me. Like, this is the conversation, in my opinion, that I wish I had been able to find online. And so I was like, we need to host it, because what we basically had chatted about privately, me and Anna, were like, this is just not talked about anywhere. So like, we need to talk about this. But the last question that I have, which I feel like kind of pulls everything together, is the planning process. So like, obviously for me, I'm like a weird little type A freak and usually try to plan everything very far in advance, just because I hate the pressure. Yep. But when someone's going into an event, so they're thinking, okay, like I, for example, want to have an event in my next year's business plan.
Yeah.
when they're thinking, okay, like today they're listening and I want to plan an event, how far like non-negotiable should the event be from the idea? Because like for me, when we started to chat together, we were probably, I would say, about just under a year away from when we were hoping to host it. And you were like, this is definitely not the norm. And so that was really shocking to me, if I'm going to be honest, because I was thinking about all the intricate pieces you're talking about. And I'm thinking how stressful it would be to, have these elements all come together in such short order. So for me, when I originally went into, okay, we got to plan an event, I thought about it like planning a wedding. Like I thought, okay, you get engaged and you get usually married, generally speaking, about a year later. So like that should be about a good time. But I'm curious, in your standpoint, obviously, of all the events that you've planned at different sizes, is there kind of like a sweet spot that someone should be conscious of when they're going into planning and also booking their event in the sense of time or distance away?
Yeah, I love this, and thank you for bringing it up because it needs to be heard and spread all over. Do not plan anything less than 6 months out. Like that should be the shortest time frame that you should be hosting an event. Now, can it be done? Yes. I will preface by saying this. Have I done it? Yes. Do I like it? No, because it stresses me out and it stresses my clients out. But in all seriousness, yeah, 6 months is kind of like a comfortable spot where you can get all of your vendors together. You can have, understanding of what this event even is going to look like and how, to put it together. I think what a lot of people forget is you need time to market it. You need time for it to be in the market, right? I think it again depends on your market and your community. Like you're an outlier. Like you put something out and it's pretty much sold out in a day.
Yeah.
Not many of us have that, right? But even for you, like we're planning so far in advance, knowing what type of marketing and promotion that you're going to provide those months out. So I had a sweet spot, I would say 8 to 12 months. That is absolutely if you're also including sponsorship.
Well, you mentioned something of like, obviously, like, so we had our day and I shared our day with Anna on social media. And within about 24 to 48 hours, we had a wait list. I was like, to our team, we need a form ASAP to build a wait list. So we started building a wait list right away. And what I will say is that my belief also in postponing and kind of like dragging out the planning process to be a little bit longer maybe than needed was also with the mindset that if we did that, we were confident on what we were actually going to be planning for. So for example, if I, put my bait out to my audience and I get 2 bites, but I was planning an event of 250 people, we got a little bit of a problem because we don't have the market to sell that event, right? So like for me, I was saying to Anna, I kind of want to market this, even though I don't really even have anything. I had nothing ready. It was just again, put something out to your audience, see what happens, see what the bites are. Mm-hmm. And what that did for me is it gave me confidence knowing that as I go into planning, am I overshooting it, right? Like, hey, I want to have 1,000 people. And meanwhile, you've got 20 people on a wait list, right? Like, I think for most people, if you're feeling, what if I plan it and no one comes? My advice from a marketing perspective, which I feel like honestly could be its own episode, is really to just try to test your audience before you even go that deep into planning and say, okay, again, to Anna's, overall theme today, is this because I want to have that many people or do I have the market for that many people? And I think the best way to really confidently know that is to ask your audience, to poll them, put up a poll on Instagram, put out a little teaser on your email, whatever it might be on your core platform that you market on, but pulse check before you even put a deposit on anything. Like check your audience to see who'd be interested. Yeah. And basically my cue to my audience was, hey, I saw this gap in the industry when it came to events. We're here to fill that gap. And if you want to be on the list for it, pop your name below. And that was it. Like that was case in point. It was one story and that was it. And again, as to Anna's point, I know that I have a very engaged audience. So that might not be the same response for everybody, but I do encourage you that if you're going to plan an event, especially if this is something that may put some pressure on you financially and you're thinking that this is a little bit of a leap for you in your business, but you're excited to do it, we're excited for you, but we also want to make sure that you're doing it with your eyes wide open as to what it looks like, what it could become. And also with that you're just going in with numbers in mind, which I feel like is the overall conversation of today. So
add two things here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So the first is this market research piece, right? And we briefly touched on it a little bit ago. It's literally you need to ask your community and your followers what they want. And I think this, like I say this every single time, it's like, do they want a retreat? Do they want a conference, right? Because those are massive different styles of learning and engaging. Do they want somewhere local, or do they want to go somewhere exotic for travel, right? So literally in your stories, or even on surveys or emails, however you interact with your audience, ask them point blank, would you rather this or this? Or do you prefer this style or this style? Because they will give you the answers, and that literally will be the way that you create and curate your experience. No joke, every single client that comes on board, I ask them, have you conducted market research? And is this style event that you're coming to me about what they need and want? Because if not, then and I full transparency say you will have trouble marketing in it, because it's not what they need. It's not what they're actually craving and wanting, even though maybe they want to be with you personally, right? Like, because maybe you're selling it, they just want to be in the room with you. But from a holistic standpoint, you might not get the numbers that you want, because the majority of your clients or community is not craving what you think they need, right? So I think that's such a good point in a market research conversation, because before you start anything, you got to know what you're creating.
You have to know. Otherwise you're going in blind and you're like, hopefully this works. And you're writing a check for a venue. You're writing a check for food and beverage. And I've seen it time and time again. I've seen people plan events and they thought they were going to have X amount of people. The tickets didn't sell. They, thought that, oh, this is what they want. I'm like, instead of guessing, instead of hoping and like just assuming that you know what the market wants, just literally ask them. They'll tell you point blank to your face, I do or I don't want this. And I think the effective part, or the necessary part for me, is that you listen. Because I think if, for example, I had the response that people didn't want the event, then that means to me, I need to go back to the drawing board. This is not a matter of, oh, well then like we'll figure out a way to market it. It's like, if they don't want it, then it should serve the consumer. And if it's only serving you and your business, in my opinion, I know. Every time I go to a business event or I go to anything, anyone's marketing, I know whether it's for you or I know whether it's for the consumer. I can tell in the first 5 seconds of something that you do. And so I think it's just so important too, with so many brands being developed online right now, and therefore so many events being hosted, that if you want to separate yourself in the space and you want your event also potentially to have a brand of its own one day, it's important to consider those factors. So honestly, Anna, I could probably talk to you for 4 hours. This is a very, I feel like potentially we need a part 2, because there's just so much that you can unpack when it comes to events. And I just want to say thank you so much for all of the knowledge. Like, I feel like we just scratched the surface. All of her information is going to be in the show notes for you. So, and the description below. So go check that out. Go give her a follow. But honestly, Anna, thank you so much. Today was incredible.
Thank you, Kate. This was so much fun. And I feel like we were just like out in your living room, just and we just scratched the surface. There's so many phases and pillars to events, but this was so much fun.
Absolutely. And honestly, shameless plug, I am going to say that you guys should do a VIP day with Anna if you are serious. Not if you're just doing like a small, you're just getting started, you're just planning, but if you're truly in the planning phase, you're not just an idea and concepts, but you're really into planning, I highly recommend booking a day with her. It is going to be the best money that you ever spend. I will say, it was such a learning experience for our first event. And if I hadn't done that, I would have been probably in like the 5-figure negative on our next event without her guidance. And so I can't tell you like how incredibly supportive it is. So if you are someone who's listening and you're like, I want to take this seriously, I want to do it right, reach out to her. Her information's below. You are not going to regret it. It's like the most incredible. It's basically Today on steroids. Okay. So like custom to your event. So like, it's definitely something you're going to want to look into. But all that to be said, you guys, Anna, obviously, thank you so much. And guys, thank you so much for listening. And as always, stay ambitious, and we'll see you guys on the next episode.